The hunger in her eyes told Barrett Nash everything he needed to know about the kind of life Olivia Grant had been living, though she tried to hide it behind a polite smile and lowered gaze as she reached for the scraped clean pot of beans at the back of the mess tent. It was 1878 in Yankton, South Dakota, and the railroad camp where Barrett worked as a trail cook had seen its share of desperate souls passing through. But something about the way this young woman's fingers trembled as she spooned the crusty remnants onto a tin plate made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar ache. She couldn't have been more than 22, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a dress that had seen better days, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and hem. Barrett watched from his position by the cook fire as she found a spot away from the other workers, perching on an overturned crate in the lengthening shadows of evening, and ate those meager leftovers with the kind of careful attention a person gave to food when they never knew where the next meal might come from. He had been working this railroad camp for 3 months now, cooking for the crews that laid track westward across the Dakota Territory. At 26, Barrett had seen enough of the frontier to know hardship when it stared him in the face. But he had never been one to stand idle when someone was suffering. His mother had raised him better than that, back on their small ranch in eastern Montana before she passed 5 years ago. Since then, he had drifted from job to job, town to town, never quite finding a place that felt like home. But cooking had always come naturally to him, a skill his mother had insisted he learn because, as she said, a man who could feed himself would never truly be helpless. The next morning, Barrett arrived at the mess tent before dawn as usual, stoking the fire and setting about preparing breakfast for the 100 or so workers who would soon descend like locusts on whatever he put out. Flapjacks, bacon, beans, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint. He had just started mixing the batter when he saw her again, Olivia standing at the edge of the tent with that same hesitant posture, waiting for everyone else to take their fill before approaching. The foreman had mentioned something yesterday about hiring a laundress for the camp, someone to handle the endless piles of filthy clothes the workers generated. Barrett had paid little attention at the time, but now he understood. She was the new laundress, which meant she would be around for a while. Something shifted in his chest as he watched her wait, and before he could talk himself out of it, Barrett made a decision. He cooked extra, not just a little extra, but significantly more than usual. When the workers lined up for breakfast, he served generous portions but held back, making sure there would be plenty left over. Good food, not just scrapings and burnt ends. When the crowd finally thinned and Olivia approached with her tin plate, Barrett was ready. "Morning," he said, his voice gruff from disuse. He had never been much of a talker. She startled slightly, her green eyes flicking up to meet his before darting away. "Good morning. You are the new laundress, right?" Barrett ladled a heap of golden flapjacks onto her plate, followed by several strips of bacon and a generous scoop of beans. "Yes, sir. Started yesterday." Her voice was soft, with a slight drawl that suggested she had come from further south. Her gaze fell to the plate in her hands, and he saw her eyes widen at the amount of food he had given her. "Oh, I cannot. This is too much. The leftovers are fine, truly." "No leftovers today," Barrett said firmly, adding another flapjack to the pile despite her protest. "Everyone gets a full plate at my cook fire. That includes you." For a moment, she simply stared at the food, and Barrett thought he saw the sheen of tears in her eyes before she blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered, and the genuine gratitude in those 2 words made something warm bloom in his chest. She found her spot on the overturned crate again, and Barrett found himself glancing her way as he cleaned up, watching the way she savored each bite like it was a feast. He had made the right choice. He would keep making extra, as much as it took to put some color back in those pale cheeks and erase the hollow look of hunger from her eyes. Over the following days, it became a routine. Barrett cooked extra at every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He never announced it, never made a show of it, but he always made sure there was plenty of good food left when Olivia came through the line. At first, she tried to refuse the generous portions he served her, insisting she did not need so much. But Barrett was nothing if not stubborn. He simply kept piling food onto her plate until she stopped arguing and accepted it with that same whispered thank you that did strange things to his heart. He learned bits and pieces about her in those first weeks, though she was not forthcoming with information about herself. She had come from Missouri, she said one evening, when Barrett asked, though she did not elaborate on why she had traveled so far north. She had no family that she mentioned, and the way her expression shuddered when he asked about it told him that was a painful subject best left alone for now. She was a hard worker, up before dawn to start the laundry and still scrubbing away long after the sun went down, her hands red and raw from the harsh lye soap and constant water. Barrett found himself thinking about her at odd moments throughout the day, wondering if she was warm enough in the small tent they had given her at the edge of camp, whether her back ached from bending over the wash tubs, if she liked the stew he had made for dinner, or preferred the roasted meat from the night before. It was foolish, he told himself. He barely knew her. But the heart did not always listen to logic, and Barrett was beginning to suspect his heart had already made up its mind about Olivia Grant. The first real conversation they had, beyond pleasantries, came 3 weeks after her arrival. Barrett had just finished serving dinner, and the workers had scattered to their various evening pursuits, gambling, drinking, or simply collapsing into their bedrolls from exhaustion. Olivia approached the mess tent as usual, but this time when Barrett handed her a plate heaped with pot roast, potatoes, and carrots, she did not immediately retreat to her crate. "Why do you do this?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. "Cook extra, I mean, for me?" Barrett considered his answer carefully, wiping his hands on his apron. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the camp, turning her auburn hair to copper. "Because nobody should have to eat scraps when there is plenty to go around. And because you work just as hard as any man here, harder probably, and you deserve a proper meal. The other workers do not get this much," she pointed out, though there was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "The other workers get plenty," Barrett countered. "I just make sure there is enough left over that you do not have to scrape the bottom of the pot." He paused, then added more honestly, "And maybe because I like knowing you are eating well. You were too thin when you got here." A faint blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the fading light. "You notice that?" "Kinda hard not to," Barrett admitted. "You look like a strong wind might blow you over." She laughed then, a soft, genuine sound that made his heart skip. "I suppose I did. Things were difficult before I came here. I had not eaten a proper meal in weeks." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken stories. Barrett wanted to ask what had brought her to such desperate circumstances, but he sensed she was not ready to share that yet. Instead, he said, "Well, you will eat proper meals as long as I am cooking. That is a promise." Olivia's eyes met his, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows that usually lingered there. "Thank you, Barrett, truly. I do not know what I did to deserve such kindness, but I am grateful for it." "You do not have to do anything to deserve kindness," Barrett said gruffly, uncomfortable with the depth of emotion her words stirred in him. "It should just be given freely." After that night, things shifted between them in subtle ways. Olivia began lingering after meals, helping Barrett clean up, even though it was not part of her job. They talked while they worked, small conversations at first about the weather, the work, the characters among the railroad crew. Barrett learned that she had a quick wit hidden beneath her quiet demeanor, that she could make him laugh with her observations about the various workers who came through the mess tent. She learned that he had grown up on a ranch, that he missed his mother every day, that he had always dreamed of having his own place someday, but had never managed to save enough money to make it happen. The more time Barrett spent with Olivia, the more he found himself falling for her. It was not just her beauty, though she was lovely in a way that made his breath catch when the light hit her just right. It was her strength, the way she faced each day with determination, despite whatever hardships she had endured. It was her gentleness with the few children in the camp, the way she always had a kind word for everyone she met. It was the way she laughed at his jokes, even the terrible ones, and the way her eyes lit up when he saved her an extra piece of pie or a particularly good cut of meat. But Barrett was not foolish enough to think his feelings were automatically returned. Olivia was friendly, grateful for his kindness certainly, but that did not mean she felt anything deeper for him. He was just the cook who made sure she had enough to eat, and maybe that was all he would ever be to her. The thought stung more than he cared to admit. Summer deepened into August, and the railroad pushed ever westward. The camp would be moving soon, following the tracks, and Barrett knew that meant a decision point was coming. Would Olivia move with the camp, or would she stay in Yankton and find other work? The question gnawed at him, but he did not know how to ask without revealing too much of what he felt. One evening, a group of workers started causing trouble near the laundry area where Olivia worked. They were drunk, rowdy, and making crude comments that carried across the camp. Barrett had been preparing the next day's bread dough, but the sound of Olivia's raised voice, firm and sharp, telling them to leave her alone, had him dropping everything and striding across the camp before he even registered making the decision to move. He arrived to find 3 men surrounding her, not touching her, but clearly intimidating her with their presence. Olivia held a heavy wash paddle in her hands like a weapon. Her chin lifted defiantly even though Barrett could see the fear in her eyes. "Gentlemen," Barrett said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being 6'3" and broad through the shoulders from years of hard work. "I believe the lady asked you to leave." The men turned, and Barrett recognized them as troublemakers who had been pushing boundaries since they joined the crew a week ago. The biggest one, a man named Coleman with a scar across his jaw, sneered. "We are just being friendly, cook. No harm in talking to a pretty girl. When a woman tells you to leave her alone, that is not an invitation to keep talking," Barrett said evenly, moving to position himself between Olivia and the men. "Now, you can walk away on your own, or I can help you along. Your choice." Coleman took a step forward, his fists clenching, but his companions grabbed his arms, pulling him back. They had seen Barrett handle sides of beef and 100-pound sacks of flour like they weighed nothing, and apparently they were not drunk enough to test whether he could handle them just as easily. "Not worth it," one of them muttered, and they retreated, Coleman shooting dark looks over his shoulder. Barrett waited until they were well gone, before turning to Olivia. She had lowered the wash paddle but was still gripping it tightly, her knuckles white. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, but her voice shook slightly. "They did not touch me, just words." "Words can be weapons too," Barrett said quietly. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her somehow, but he kept his hands at his sides. "You should not have to deal with that." "It is not the first time men have acted that way," Olivia said, setting the paddle aside. She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm evening air. "I have learned to handle it. That does not make it right." Barrett felt anger simmering in his gut, not at Olivia, but at a world that forced women to learn how to fend off unwanted attention as a matter of survival. "If anyone bothers you again, you come find me. I do not care what time it is or what I am doing." Olivia looked up at him, and something shifted in her expression, a softness that had not been there before. "You would do that? Protect me?" "Of course I would," Barrett said, confused that she would even question it. "You think I would just let someone hurt you?" "Most men would not involve themselves," she said quietly. "Most men would say it was not their business, or worse, they would join in." She took a step closer to him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used in her hair. "But you are not like most men, are you? Barrett Nash?" His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I just try to do what is right." "It is more than that." Her hand came up, hesitating for a moment before resting gently on his forearm. Even through his shirt sleeve, her touch sent warmth racing through him. "You have been kind to me from the very first day. You saw that I was hungry and struggling, and instead of ignoring it or taking advantage of it like others might have, you helped me. You have helped me every single day since, asking nothing in return. Why?" Barrett could have deflected, could have given her some simple answer about how it was just the decent thing to do. But standing there with her hand on his arm and her green eyes looking up at him with such openness, he found he could not lie. "Because from the moment I saw you, I could not stop thinking about you. Because making sure you have enough to eat, making sure you are safe and cared for, it has become the most important part of my day. Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Olivia Grant, and I cannot seem to help myself." The words hung in the air between them, and Barrett braced himself for rejection, for the awkward conversation that would follow when she explained kindly that she did not feel the same way. But instead, Olivia's face broke into the most beautiful smile he had ever seen, and tears sparkled in her eyes. "I was hoping you would say something like that," she whispered, "because I have been falling in love with you too, and I did not know if you felt anything beyond pity for the poor, hungry woman who came to your camp." "Pity," Barrett repeated, astonished. "Olivia, I have never pitied you. Admired you, yes. Worried about you, certainly. Spent every waking moment thinking about you and hoping I would get to see you smile, absolutely. But never pity." She laughed through her tears, and then somehow she was in his arms, and Barrett was holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling like something that had been broken inside him for years was finally healing. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, before Olivia pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I should tell you about my past," she said, her expression turning serious. "Before this goes any further, you deserve to know what brought me here. You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share," Barrett assured her, though he was curious about the shadows he sometimes saw in her eyes. "No, I want to." Olivia took a deep breath, stepping back from his embrace but taking his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I grew up in Missouri, like I told you. My parents died when I was 16, cholera. I had no other family, so I ended up working as a maid for a wealthy family in St. Louis. The work was hard, but it was honest, and I was grateful for it. But then the son of the family, he started paying attention to me. At first I thought he was just being friendly, but then he made it clear what he wanted, and when I refused him, he told his parents I had stolen from them." Barrett's jaw tightened, anger flooding through him at the injustice of it. "They dismissed me without references and spread word that I was a thief," Olivia continued, her voice steady but pained. "No one in St. Louis would hire me after that. I tried to find work in other towns, but word seemed to follow me everywhere I went. I spent months drifting, taking whatever jobs I could find, going hungry more often than not. By the time I reached Yankton, I was desperate. When I heard the railroad camp needed a laundress, I begged them to give me a chance. The foreman took pity on me, I think, because I know I looked half-starved. And then I met you, and everything changed." "I am so sorry that happened to you," Barrett said fiercely, pulling her close again. "You did not deserve any of that. That man, his family, they should be ashamed of themselves." "It does not matter anymore," Olivia said, resting her head against his chest. "I am here now, with you, and for the first time in years. I feel safe. I feel like maybe I can have a future worth looking forward to." "You can," Barrett promised. "Whatever future you want, we will build it together if you will have me." She tilted her head back, her eyes shining. "I will have you, Barrett Nash, today, tomorrow, and for as long as you will have me." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, pouring all the feelings he had been holding back into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling like fools, and Barrett felt happier than he could ever remember being. The news of their relationship spread through the camp quickly, as news always did in close quarters, but the response was largely positive. The workers had seen how Barrett looked after Olivia, and most of them approved of the match. Even the foreman, a grizzled man named Henderson who rarely smiled, gave Barrett a nod of approval when he heard. "About time you found yourself someone," Henderson said one morning as Barrett was preparing breakfast. "You are a good man, Nash. She is lucky to have you." "I think I am the lucky one," Barrett replied, and he meant it. As summer faded into early autumn, Barrett and Olivia spent every spare moment together. She still worked her laundry job, and he still cooked for the camp. But now they shared those early mornings and late evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning the details of each other's lives. Barrett taught her how to make bread, standing behind her with his arms around her as he guided her hands through kneading the dough. Olivia taught him the words to songs from her childhood, her voice sweet and clear as she sang while they worked side by side. The railroad camp prepared to move westward, following the advancing tracks, and Barrett knew he needed to make a decision about his future. He could continue following the railroad, cooking for camps as they pushed toward the Pacific, or he could finally pursue his dream of settling down somewhere and having his own place. He had saved nearly every penny he earned over the past few years, living frugally and avoiding the drinking and gambling that consumed so many workers' wages. It still was not enough for a proper ranch, but it might be enough for a small piece of land where he could build something. One evening in late September, as they sat together watching the sun set over the Dakota plains, Barrett broached the subject with Olivia. "The camp is moving next week," he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, where they sat side by side. "Henderson wants me to go with them as the cook. Will you go?" Olivia asked, though he could hear the tension in her voice. "That depends on you," Barrett said. "I have been thinking about staying in Yankton, or maybe finding a place nearby. I have some money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land and start building a homestead. It would not be much at first, just a cabin and maybe room for a few chickens and a cow. but it would be ours. We could build it into something more over time. Olivia turned to look at him, her eyes wide. Ours? If you will marry me, Barrett said, his heart racing. He had not planned to propose right then, but the words came out anyway, feeling right and true. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I know my own heart, Olivia. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Say yes, and we will stay here. We will make a home together, a real home where you never have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, or whether you are safe. I will spend every day of my life making sure you are happy and cared for. Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but she was smiling. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Barrett. Nothing would make me happier. They married a week later in a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Yankton. Olivia wore a new dress that Barrett had bought for her from the general store, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Barrett wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto Olivia's finger. The workers from the railroad camp attended, along with a handful of townsfolk who had heard about the wedding, and Henderson served as Barrett's best man, gruffly declaring it the best decision Barrett had ever made. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the camp, with music and dancing and more food than Barrett had cooked in weeks. He had spent days preparing a feast, roasted chickens and beef, fresh bread, pies made with the last of the summer berries, potatoes and vegetables in every form imaginable. It was his wedding gift to Olivia, a celebration of abundance after so much scarcity, and the joy on her face as she moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, made every hour of work worth it. When the celebration finally wound down and the guests dispersed, Barrett and Olivia walked to the small cabin he had rented in town, a temporary place until they could build their own home. It was not much, just 2 rooms with a fireplace and a narrow bed, but it was clean and private, and it was theirs. I cannot believe this is real, Olivia said, standing in the middle of the main room and turning in a slow circle, taking it all in. A month ago, I was sleeping in a tent and eating scraps, and now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, and we have a place of our own. It is real, Barrett assured her, crossing the room to take her in his arms. And it is just the beginning. We have our whole lives ahead of us, Olivia Nash. She smiled at the sound of her new name. Olivia Nash. I like the sound of that. So do I, Barrett murmured, and then he was kissing her, and words became unnecessary. The following weeks were some of the happiest of Barrett's life. He found work as a cook at one of the hotels in Yankton. Not glamorous, but steady and well-paying enough to support them while they saved for their land. Olivia took in laundry and sewing, her reputation for quality work spreading quickly through the small town. Every penny they earned went into a jar they kept hidden under a floorboard, their fund for the future they were building together. In his spare time, Barrett explored the area around Yankton, looking for the right piece of land. He wanted something with good water, fertile soil for a garden, and enough space to expand as their needs grew. He found it in early November, 20 acres just outside of town along the Missouri River. The land had a natural spring, stands of cottonwood trees, and rolling prairie that would be perfect for crops or livestock. The price was fair, and when Barrett took Olivia to see it, her reaction told him everything he needed to know. "It is perfect," she breathed, standing in the middle of what would someday be their homestead, the wind whipping her skirts around her legs. "I can see it, Barrett. Our house right there on that rise, with windows facing east so we can watch the sunrise. A barn over there for animals. A garden here where the ground is flat and sheltered." "Then it is ours," Barrett said, pulling her close. "I will file the claim tomorrow." They broke ground on their cabin in early spring of 1879, as soon as the ground thawed enough to work. Barrett did most of the construction himself, with Olivia helping where she could, and bringing him lunch every day without fail, hearty meals that fueled his labor. Neighbors from surrounding homesteads came to help with the heavy work of raising the walls and roof, and Barrett returned the favor by cooking for them, great pots of stew and platters of cornbread that disappeared almost as fast as he could make them. By late May, the cabin was finished, a sturdy structure with 2 rooms that could be expanded as needed, a solid fireplace, real glass windows that Olivia had insisted on, and a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well built, and it was theirs, free and clear. They moved in on a bright June morning, their belongings loaded in a borrowed wagon, Olivia had cried when Barrett carried her over the threshold, overwhelmed with emotion at finally having a real home after so many years of uncertainty. They spent that first day arranging their few pieces of furniture, hanging curtains Olivia had sewn, and stocking the kitchen with supplies. That evening, Barrett cooked their first meal in their new home, venison steaks with potatoes and greens from the garden they had already planted, and they ate at the small table by the window, holding hands and talking about their plans for the future. "I want to get chickens first," Olivia said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Fresh eggs every morning, and we can sell the extra in town. And maybe a milk cow so we can have fresh milk and butter. We will need a proper barn before winter," Barrett added, "somewhere to store hay and shelter the animals when the weather turns cold." "And I was thinking," Olivia said, a slight blush coloring her cheeks, "that we might want to add another room to the cabin soon, in case we need it." It took Barrett a moment to understand what she was suggesting, and then his eyes widened. "Olivia, are you saying—" "I am not certain yet," she said quickly, "but I think I might be expecting. It is early still, but certain signs suggest it might be true." Joy flooded through Barrett, so intense it was almost painful. "A baby!" He stood up, moving around the table to pull her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." "I think so," Olivia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Barrett kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I am beyond happy. I am the luckiest man alive." The confirmation came a few weeks later from the doctor in town, and suddenly everything took on new urgency. Barrett worked longer hours, taking on extra jobs in town to earn money for the additional room they would need and the supplies that would come with a baby. Olivia continued her sewing work, but gave up the heavy laundry, focusing instead on making tiny clothes and blankets for their coming child. Summer passed in a blur of work and preparation. The garden flourished, providing more vegetables than they could eat themselves, so Olivia preserved everything she could in jars for the winter. Barrett built a chicken coop and purchased 6 hens and a rooster, and the fresh eggs were a luxury they had both missed. He also acquired a gentle milk cow named Bessie, who provided more than enough milk for their needs. As Olivia's belly grew round with their child, Barrett found himself overwhelmed with protectiveness and love. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough, that she did not overwork herself, that she was comfortable and happy. Olivia bore his attention with amused patience, assuring him repeatedly that she was fine, that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, that he did not need to worry so much. But Barrett could not help worrying. He had already lost so many people he loved, his parents, friends to accidents and illness, and the thought of anything happening to Olivia or their baby was more than he could bear. He said as much one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his hand resting on her swollen stomach. "Nothing is going to happen to me," Olivia said gently, covering his hand with hers. "I am healthy and strong, and the doctor says everything is progressing well. You have to trust that this will work out." "I just love you so much," Barrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and this baby, you are my whole world. I do not know what I would do if I lost you." "You are not going to lose me," Olivia assured him. "We are a family now, Barrett, and we are going to stay that way for a very long time. I promise." Their son was born on a cold January night in 1880, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Barrett had fetched the midwife from town when Olivia's labor started, then spent the longest hours of his life pacing the main room of the cabin while the midwife and a neighbor woman attended to his wife. When he finally heard the baby's cry, followed shortly by the midwife calling him in, Barrett's legs nearly gave out from relief. Olivia was propped up in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. "Come meet your son," she said softly, and Barrett moved to her side on shaking legs. The baby was perfect, impossibly small, with a dusting of dark hair and a scrunched-up red face. When Barrett carefully took him from Olivia, the infant opened his eyes, unfocused but searching, and Barrett felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is beautiful," Barrett whispered, unable to take his eyes off his son. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Benjamin," Olivia said, "after your father." Barrett looked at her, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Benjamin Nash. It is perfect." Those early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Benjamin was a good baby overall, but he still needed constant attention, and both Barrett and Olivia were running on very little sleep. But every time Barrett looked at his son, every time he saw Olivia nursing the baby or singing him to sleep, he was overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. As Benjamin grew, so did their homestead. Barrett added the extra room as planned, giving them a separate bedroom and leaving the main room for living and cooking. He built a proper barn that summer, with help from neighbors who had become good friends. They acquired more chickens, a second cow, and a team of horses that Barrett used to plow fields for planting wheat and corn. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Barrett worked the land and took occasional jobs in town when money was needed for supplies or improvements. Olivia managed the house, cared for Benjamin, and continued her sewing work, which had expanded to include orders from as far away as Sioux Falls. Their days were long and full of hard work, but they were happy, truly happy in a way that Barrett had never imagined possible back when he was drifting from job to job with no real purpose. Benjamin took his first steps on a warm spring afternoon when he was just over a year old, toddling from his mother's arms to his father's, with a look of intense concentration on his little face. Barrett had scooped him up, tossing him gently in the air until the baby shrieked with laughter, and Olivia had clapped her hands in delight. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it was those small moments that made life worth living. Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their family and homestead. Olivia gave birth to a daughter in 1882, a sweet-natured girl with her mother's auburn hair and green eyes whom they named Emily. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas, who proved to be adventurous and fearless from the moment he could crawl. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Barrett adding rooms whenever Olivia announced another child was on the way. By 1887, they had 5 children in total: Benjamin, Emily, Thomas, Sarah, and baby Daniel, and their 20 acres had grown to 80 through careful saving and the purchase of adjacent land. They had a herd of cattle, fields of wheat and corn that stretched toward the horizon, and a reputation in the area as honest, hard-working people who were always willing to help a neighbor in need. Through it all, Barrett never forgot those early days when he had first seen Olivia reaching for leftovers with trembling hands. He still cooked extra at every meal, though now it was to feed their large family and the various people who seemed to always be around at mealtimes. Neighbors stopping by, hired hands during harvest, friends and their children. The table in their dining room, built by Barrett's own hands from good oak wood, could seat 12, and it was rare that all the chairs were empty. Olivia bloomed in the security and love of their life together. The thin, haunted woman who had arrived at the railroad camp was gone, replaced by someone confident and content, quick to laugh and always ready with a kind word. She was an involved mother who somehow managed to keep track of 5 active children while also running the household, maintaining her sewing business, and finding time to read and pursue her own interests. She was Barrett's partner in every sense of the word, and he fell more in love with her with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1888, after the children had been put to bed and the house had finally quieted, Barrett and Olivia sat on their porch, as they had so many times before, watching the sun set over their land. Barrett's arm was around her shoulders, and Olivia was leaning against him, content and peaceful. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Olivia asked softly. "If you had not noticed me that day at the camp? If you had not started making extra food?" "I think about it sometimes," Barrett admitted, "and it terrifies me to imagine a life where I did not have you and the children." "I would have died, I think," Olivia said matter-of-factly. "I was at the end of my resources when I came to Yankton. If you had not helped me, if you had not seen me and cared enough to do something, I do not know what would have become of me." "Well, I did see you," Barrett said firmly, tightening his arm around her. "And I always will. That is the deal we made, remember? In good times and bad, we face it together." "Best deal I ever made," Olivia said, tilting her face up to kiss him. Even after 10 years of marriage, the touch of her lips still sent warmth racing through him. "I love you, Barrett Nash. Thank you for saving me." "You saved me right back," Barrett said honestly. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting. This life we have, it is everything I never knew I wanted." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge, countless points of light scattered across the vast Dakota darkness. Inside the house, one of the children cried out in their sleep, a small sound that was quickly soothed. The horses nickered softly in the barn, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its lonesome song. As the years continued to pass, the Nash homestead became something of a landmark in the area. People spoke admiringly of what Barrett and Olivia had built, not just the physical structures and thriving farm, but the family they had raised and the community they had fostered. Their children grew strong and capable. Each one taught the value of hard work and compassion for others. Benjamin, the oldest, showed a talent for working with animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Emily had inherited her mother's skill with a needle and her father's generous heart. Thomas was fearless and adventurous, already talking about seeing the wider world beyond South Dakota. Sarah was the quiet one, always with a book in hand, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Daniel, the baby, was still too young to show where his interests lay, but he was doted on by his older siblings and parents alike. The railroad that had brought Barrett and Olivia together continued to expand, bringing more settlers to the Dakota Territory. Towns grew, schools were built, and the wild frontier slowly became more civilized. Through it all, the Nash family adapted and prospered, always ready to welcome newcomers and help them get established, just as others had helped them in those early days. In 1889, South Dakota achieved statehood, and there was great celebration throughout the territory. The Nash family traveled to Yankton for the festivities, and Barrett found himself thinking about that railroad camp where he had met Olivia, now long gone as the tracks had pushed westward. So much had changed since then, but the essentials remained the same. He still cooked extra at every meal, though now it was habit rather than conscious effort. Olivia still sometimes got a distant look in her eyes when food was mentioned, a shadow of those hungry days that never quite faded. But those shadows were balanced by the light of everything they had built together, and Barrett knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. One autumn afternoon in 1892, Barrett was working in the barn, repairing a stall door that had come loose when Emily came running in, her face flushed with excitement. At 12 years old, she was growing into a young woman, though Barrett still saw her as his little girl. "Papa, there is a family on the road," she said breathlessly. "They look like they need help. Mama said I should fetch you." Barrett set down his tools and followed Emily out to the front of the property, where a wagon had stopped near their gate. The family in the wagon looked exhausted and travel-worn. A man and woman not much older than Barrett and Olivia had been when they married, and 3 small children huddled under blankets despite the mild weather. The woman's face had the same hollow, desperate look that Olivia's had worn that first day at the railroad camp, and Barrett's decision was instant. "Olivia, set extra places for dinner," he called toward the house, where his wife had come out onto the porch. "We have guests." The relief on the travelers' faces was palpable. Barrett helped them stable their horses and brought them into the house, where Olivia was already pulling out chairs and bustling about the kitchen. The children, a boy of about 6 and twin girls, who could not have been more than 4, stared wide-eyed at the abundance of food that began appearing on the table. "We do not mean to impose," the man said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "We just needed to rest the horses for a moment." "It is no imposition," Barrett said firmly, echoing words he had spoken so many times before. "No one passes through here hungry if we can help it. Sit down and eat." The meal that followed was reminiscent of those early days with Olivia, Barrett, and his wife exchanging glances as they watched the family eat like they had not had a proper meal in weeks. The man's name was Robert, and his wife was Grace. They had been traveling from Illinois, hoping to claim land and start fresh after their farm had failed in the economic panic. They had been on the road for months, their resources dwindling with each mile. After the meal, as the children played together in the yard and Grace helped Olivia with the dishes, Robert opened up to Barrett about their situation. "I do not know if we will make it," he admitted, his voice low so the children would not hear. "We have barely enough money left to file a claim, much less buy seed and supplies to last until the first harvest. I am starting to think we should turn back, but I do not know what we would turn back to." Barrett knew that feeling, that sense of being caught between an uncertain future and an impossible past. He thought about the chances that had been given to him and Olivia, the kindness that had made all the difference. "How much land are you hoping to claim?" he asked. "Anything we can get," Robert said. "Just enough to farm and support my family." "There is a quarter section adjacent to my property," Barrett said thoughtfully. Good land with access to water. The man who owned it passed last year, and his widow moved back east. She has been trying to sell it, but has not found a buyer yet. I could introduce you to the land agent in town, maybe put in a good word. As for supplies and seed, I can help you with that. Robert's eyes widened. I could not possibly accept charity. It is not charity, Barrett said. It is a loan, if that makes you feel better about it. You can pay me back after your first harvest, and in the meantime, you can work for me. I need help bringing in my wheat crop before the snow flies. The pay is fair, and it will give you a chance to earn a bit extra while you get established. Why would you do this for strangers? Robert asked, his voice thick with emotion. Barrett glanced through the window at Olivia, who was laughing at something Grace had said, her hands gesturing animatedly as she told a story. Because someone did it for me once, he said simply, and because it is the right thing to do. Robert and Grace accepted the offer, and over the following months, they became not just neighbors, but dear friends. Barrett helped Robert purchase the land and supplied him with everything needed to break ground in the spring. True to his word, Robert worked hard helping with the harvest, and then with various projects around the Nash homestead through the winter. Grace and Olivia became close, bonding over shared experiences of hardship and the challenges of raising children on the frontier. By the spring of 1893, Robert and Grace were established on their own land with a small cabin and the beginnings of their first crop. Their children had filled out, no longer looking half-starved, and there was hope in their eyes where before there had been only desperation. On the day they moved into their own place, Grace pulled Olivia aside and thanked her with tears streaming down her face. "You saved us," Grace said. "You and Barrett, you gave us a chance when we had nothing left. I will never forget that. Just promise me that if you see someone in need someday, you will help them too," Olivia said, embracing the other woman. "That is how we make the world better, one act of kindness at a time." The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes both large and small. The Nash children grew older, Benjamin eventually leaving for college to pursue his dream of veterinary medicine, Emily taking over much of her mother's sewing business, Thomas working the farm alongside his father with skill and dedication. More settlers arrived in the area, and the Nash family helped as many as they could, offering loans, supplies, labor, and advice. Their table remained a gathering place, always set with extra food, always welcoming whoever might need a meal or a listening ear. Through droughts and harsh winters, through economic downturns and personal challenges, Barrett and Olivia faced everything together. There were hard times, certainly, seasons when the crops failed or illness struck, but they weathered each storm with the same determination that had carried them through those early days. Their love, which had begun with a simple act of kindness over a plate of food, had grown into something deep and unshakable, the foundation upon which their entire life was built. In 1895, when Benjamin returned from college with his veterinary degree, he brought with him a young woman named Alice, whom he had met at school. The wedding was held at the Nash homestead that summer, a joyous occasion that brought together family and friends from all over the region. As Barrett watched his eldest son exchange vows, he felt Olivia's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it gently, remembering their own simple ceremony so many years ago. "We did well," Olivia whispered, leaning against him. "We did," Barrett agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "We really did." More grandchildren followed, as the Nash children married and started families of their own. The homestead, already expanded multiple times, gained additional structures as adult children built their own homes on family land, creating a small compound of related families. Sunday dinners became epic affairs, with sometimes 30 or more people gathered around multiple tables pushed together, food covering every available surface, and children of all ages running and playing in the yard. Barrett, now in his 40s with silver threading through his dark hair, still insisted on doing most of the cooking for these gatherings. It was his love language, the way he showed care for his family, and everyone knew better than to try to take over his kitchen during Sunday dinner preparations. He still made extra, always extra, ensuring that no plate was less than overflowing and that there were plenty of leftovers to send home with families. Olivia, also graying but still beautiful in Barrett's eyes, often stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched him work with a soft smile on her face. Sometimes she would come up behind him and wrap her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back, and Barrett would pause in whatever he was doing to savor the moment. After all these years, she still had the power to make his heart race with just a touch. One evening, after a particularly large Sunday gathering had finally wound down and the last of their children and grandchildren had departed, Barrett and Olivia found themselves alone on their porch once more. It had become their tradition, this quiet time at the end of busy days, a chance to reconnect and reflect. "Do you know what I was thinking about today?" Olivia asked, her head resting on Barrett's shoulder. "What is that?" "That first meal you served me at the railroad camp. The shock I felt when I saw how much food you had given me, like I had done something to deserve such abundance when I knew I had not." Olivia's voice was soft with memory. "I thought you had made a mistake, that you would realize and take it back. But you never did. Every meal, every single day, you made sure I had more than enough." "I remember watching you eat," Barrett said. "The way you savored every bite, like it was the finest feast instead of camp food. It made me want to cook better, to give you things that were actually worth savoring." "Everything you have ever made for me has been worth savoring," Olivia said firmly, "because it was made with love. I knew that even then, before I understood what I was feeling, before I could admit to myself that I was falling in love with you. I knew that the food you gave me came with something more than just nutrition. It came with care and attention and the simple message that I mattered, that my hunger and my well-being were important to someone." Barrett turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. Even in the fading light, he could see the same green eyes that had captivated him from the beginning, though now they were framed by laugh lines and the marks of a life well lived. "You mattered then, and you matter now, and you will matter to me until my very last breath," he said fiercely. "You and the children and the grandchildren, you are all my whole world. Everything I do, everything I build, it is all for you." "I know," Olivia said, tears shining in her eyes, though she was smiling. "I have always known. You show me every day in 1,000 ways, but especially in the way you still cook extra, making sure everyone has a full plate. You give that same care to everyone who comes through our door, and I love you for it. You see people's hunger, whether it is for food or connection or just simple kindness, and you feed it without hesitation." "I learned from the best," Barrett said, kissing her forehead. "My mother taught me to cook, but you taught me why it matters. You taught me that feeding someone is about more than just filling their stomach. It is about dignity and care and showing someone that they are valuable." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night sounds of their homestead surrounded them, the gentle lowing of cattle, the soft clucking of chickens settling for the night, the distant yapping of their dogs making their rounds. It was a symphony of home, of safety, of a life built with intention and love. As the years continued to pass, Barrett and Olivia settled into the role of family elders with grace. Their children were all well established, Benjamin with his thriving veterinary practice, Emily running a successful dressmaking business from her home on the property, Thomas managing most of the daily operations of the farm, Sarah teaching at the school in Yankton, and Daniel, now grown and married, working as a blacksmith. The grandchildren kept coming, eventually numbering in the dozens, and the Nash homestead remained the beating heart of their extended family. Barrett's health began to slow him down a bit as he entered his 60s, but he refused to stop cooking. Olivia worried about him standing for long hours over a hot stove, but Barrett was stubborn about it. "The day I cannot cook for my family is the day you might as well plant me in the ground," he would say whenever she tried to get him to rest more. In truth, cooking was what kept him young. He loved the rhythm of it, the creativity, the knowledge that his food would bring joy to people he loved. He experimented with new recipes, incorporating techniques and ingredients that had become available as transportation improved and the wider world became more accessible. But his favorites were still the simple, hearty meals he had learned to make in those early days. Beef stew, fresh bread, roasted chicken, fruit pies made with berries picked from bushes around the property. As the new century turned and the year 1900 arrived, there was much talk about progress and change, about how the world was becoming modern and different. But at the Nash homestead, the essentials remained unchanged. Families still gathered on Sundays, the table still overflowed with food, and love still bound them all together. Olivia's health began to decline in 1902. Nothing dramatic, but a gradual slowing that worried Barrett more than he could express. She tired more easily, needed more rest, and moved with less of the vibrant energy that had always characterized her. The doctor called it simply the wearing effects of age and a life of hard work, and prescribed rest and gentle activity. Barrett became even more protective, taking over tasks Olivia had always handled, and insisting she sit down more often. She protested at first, insisting she was fine, but eventually she accepted his care with the same grace she had accepted everything else in their life together. They spent more time on the porch, less time working, and Barrett made sure every meal he prepared for her was something special, something made with extra love and attention. One autumn evening in 1903, as they sat watching the sunset, Olivia grew reflective. "I have been thinking about writing down our story," she said suddenly, "for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who will come after us, so they know where they came from." "What story is that?" Barrett asked, though he suspected he knew. "Our story. How we met, how you saved me with kindness and good food, how we built this life together from nothing. The story of how love and generosity can transform lives." Olivia squeezed his hand. "I want them to know that their grandmother was once so hungry she could only eat scraps, and their grandfather saw that hunger and decided to do something about it. I want them to understand that the abundance they enjoy, the security they take for granted, it all started with one person choosing to be kind." "Then write it down," Barrett encouraged. "I will help you remember the details." And so Olivia began the project, spending her quieter moments recording their history in careful handwriting on pages that would eventually be bound into a book. Barrett sat with her often as she wrote, adding his own memories and perspectives. It became a labor of love, a legacy beyond the land and buildings they would leave behind. The winters grew harder as they aged, and the winter of 1905 was particularly brutal. Barrett, now in his early 70s but still stubbornly vital, continued his daily routines despite the cold. But one morning in late January, he woke with a cough that would not go away. By evening, it had become clear that he had developed a serious lung infection. Olivia, despite her own frailty, insisted on nursing him herself. Their children came to help, taking turns sitting with their father, bringing medicines from town, and keeping the house warm and comfortable. But as the days passed and Barrett's condition worsened rather than improved, the family began to fear the worst. Barrett, lying in the bed he had shared with Olivia for more than a quarter-century, was not afraid of death. He had lived a full life, loved deeply, and built something lasting. But the thought of leaving Olivia, of not being there to care for her, to cook her meals and ensure she was never hungry again, that terrified him. "Promise me something," he said to her one evening, his voice weak but urgent. She was sitting beside the bed, holding his hand as she had for days now. "Promise me you will eat, that you will not go back to surviving on scraps just because I am not here to cook for you." "Do not talk like that," Olivia said, though tears were streaming down her face. "You are going to recover, and we are going to have many more years together." "Olivia, please," Barrett interrupted gently. "I need to hear you promise." "I promise," she said, her voice breaking. "I promise I will eat well and take care of myself. But you have to promise me something too. You have to promise you will fight, that you will not give up." "I will fight," Barrett assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. "For you, I will always fight." Whether it was the medicines, the care of his family, or simply his stubborn will, Barrett began to improve. Slowly, painfully slowly, the infection cleared and his strength returned. By early March, he was able to leave the bed for short periods, and by April, he was back in the kitchen, though not at full capacity. Olivia and their daughters fussed over him, limiting how much time he spent on his feet, but Barrett was happier in motion, doing the work he loved. His recovery took months, and he never quite regained his full strength, but by the summer of 1905, Barrett was once again cooking for family gatherings, though he accepted more help than before. He taught his grandchildren the recipes his mother had taught him, and the ones he had developed over years of feeding the people he loved. He wanted to ensure that the tradition of abundance and care that had defined his kitchen would continue even after he was gone. Olivia finished writing their story that summer, presenting the completed manuscript to Barrett on his 73rd birthday. He read it slowly over the following weeks, moved to tears multiple times by her beautiful words and the memories they evoked. She had captured not just the facts of their life together, but the emotion, the love that had sustained them through everything. "This is beautiful," he told her when he finished, holding the pages carefully. "You have given our family a great gift." We gave them the gift together, Olivia corrected. Every day of love and care, every meal shared, every kind word and generous act. That is the real gift. The book is just a record of it. They continued on, day by day, season by season. There were more scares, more illnesses and setbacks as their aged bodies began to fail them in small ways. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from each other and from the family they had built. The grandchildren came often, filling the house with noise and energy, and Barrett and Olivia delighted in watching the next generation grow. In the spring of 1908, Olivia became seriously ill with pneumonia. Unlike Barrett, she did not have the strength to fight it off. The family gathered, knowing the end was near, and said their goodbyes. Barrett held her hand through those final days, telling her over and over how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every moment they had shared. "I am not afraid," Olivia whispered one evening, her voice barely audible. "I am just sad to leave you." "I will not be far behind," Barrett assured her, though the thought of life without her was unbearable. "We will find each other again, wherever we are going." "I know we will," Olivia said, managing a small smile. "Thank you, Barrett. Thank you for seeing me all those years ago. Thank you for making extra so I would have a full plate. Thank you for loving me so completely that I never once doubted it." "Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did," Barrett said through his tears. "You were always worth it." Olivia Grant Nash passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, with Barrett holding her hand and their children gathered around. She was 72 years old, and she had lived a life transformed by love from those desperate days at the railroad camp to a full, abundant existence surrounded by family. Barrett was devastated by her loss, but he carried on for the sake of their children and grandchildren. He continued cooking, though it brought him less joy without Olivia there to share the meals. He told stories about their life together to anyone who would listen, making sure the grandchildren understood what their grandmother had meant to him. He tended her grave every day, bringing fresh flowers and spending quiet moments telling her about the family news. He lived for another 2 years after Olivia's passing, years marked by a quiet melancholy, but also continued engagement with his family. He was there for the birth of great-great-grandchildren, for weddings and celebrations, for the everyday moments that made up a life. He never stopped cooking, never stopped making extra, never stopped ensuring that everyone who came to his table left with a full plate and a full heart. Barrett Nash died in his sleep in October of 1910, just a few days after his 78th birthday. His family found him peacefully at rest, a smile on his face, and they liked to imagine that he had gone to join Olivia wherever she was waiting. They buried him beside her in the small family cemetery on the homestead, under a large oak tree that provided shade in summer and shelter in winter. The Nash homestead continued for generations after Barrett and Olivia were gone, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carrying on the traditions they had established. The Sunday dinners continued, the overflowing plates, the open-door policy for anyone in need. Olivia's written account of their love story was passed down through the family, each generation reading it and understanding anew the power of kindness and the way love could transform lives. And so, the legacy of the cowboy who saw a hungry woman and decided to make extra so she would always have a full plate lived on. It lived on in the food that continued to be shared generously, in the help given freely to neighbors and strangers, in the love that bound the family together across decades and generations. Barrett and Olivia Nash had started with nothing but each other and a simple act of compassion, and they had built something that would last forever. A family rooted in love and abundance, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures, a full plate offered to someone in need, could change the entire course of a life. Their graves remained under the oak tree, tended by loving hands, visited often by descendants who came to pay their respects, and remember the story of how it all began. And, if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could almost hear Barrett's voice on the wind, still calling out that dinner was ready and there was plenty for everyone, making sure that even in death, he continued the work of feeding those he loved.